Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. It is a while since I've done a presentation this way. Interestingly, before some came on the call, we were actually talking about some of the things that have changed in 2020. And one of the things that I think I really wanted to say tonight, and yes, anything I say is up for challenge, is I'm not really going to talk about me as a person, but I will give some background because that will make sense to why I am presenting what I'm about to show you. I used to work for ARM. I was one of the senior security managers. So my area is I'm a systems engineer and cybersecurity. So from my point of view, the new way of working is I'd been looking at research with a MPhil I was doing at Cambridge, which I completed in 2016. Due to personal reasons, anyway, I've decided to restart my PhD. But what I became interested in was actually human factors. Previously, in previous lifetimes, I trained as a teacher. I have been interested in human area, all aspects of the human factors ecosystem, because at the end of the day, technology is all well and good, but the end recipients of what is being utilized for technology and new ways of working affects humans. So what I wanted to really look at tonight is really some of the sorts of the research that I've been looking at with regards to how we may be changing how we look at risk decision making going forward. And I'm not going to look at the whole of a methodology. What I'm looking at in particular is I'm going to move on to next screen to actually think about is when we think about ways of working, one of the conversation pieces, if you weren't on it right at the beginning tonight, was saying what I've been told by friends and especially kids is they found that this environment sometimes maybe not real, or they've got sick of it. They now assume if they're on a Zoom call, then that's school. And actually they've lost the idea of what's balance. So what I wanted to really think about tonight from a human factors point of view is looking at what we need to consider if we're thinking about risk and cyber risk in particular. And why I'm going to put forward is a set of attributes that we will be evolving into a new framework with the research I'm doing for the PhD, but also looking at the concept of situational awareness and linking with that. When we talk about situational awareness, what we're actually talking about is you, the individual, in your reality, actually being aware of what's going on around you. And actually, for us, that's really important. Is there's certain questions when we think of new ways of working. Are we actually working in a new way? You know, what does it look like? What things do we need to be doing? How do we need to do it? And as I said at the beginning, we were talking about kids doing education, and really before 2020, you never heard about them really seriously involved in doing conference calls. And yet, sort of remote learning is not new. If you were in the Australian outback over the decades, even before the Second World War, you wouldn't be attending school, you would be going to school over the airwaves or via radio. So, you know, distributed ways of working isn't a new concept, but it's definitely come into the mainstream this year. And I think the when, the where, the how, that perhaps one of the things when we're working at home, when we're thinking about us as humans and us as people, we need to think about the environment we're actually in. So normally with cybersecurity, if you've had any involvement from a development point of view, a secure development life cycle, doing physical security, the whole ref and realms of this area, you tend to be presented with something that tends to be called the security triad of confidentiality, integrity, availability. Now, that does have a bearing when we're working so heavily reliant on the cyber world. But actually, does that go far enough for us to be aware of the environment we face if we're working in a distributed way, whether that's working at home, it's working if somebody defines what home is, or they can't work at home for whatever reason. So they may go and work in a pub, for instance. There's some pubs around the UK so that they can get business in. Have actually opened their doors up to remote workers, is another way. But there are still things we need to be thinking about, and also to think about working in balance. So there's 2 or 3 messages to take away, I hopefully will put over by thinking about the 9 things. So the Ennead framework is just an idea of a name. It's not, you will not find it anywhere on the internet. It's something that's a work in progress right now. Ennead actually comes from Ennea, which is 9 in Greek, and also was referred to 9 of the main deities in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, all based around Amun, the god of the sun god. So from that point of view, I'd like to move on. So when we're talking about the Ennead framework and looking at new ways in the human factors ecosystem, when we think about the environment we're in, the aspects to think about is we're actually, instead of saying the triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we need to be aware of in any situation we find ourselves in, is actually this is extended to be thought about in an integrated way, to also think about ownership and control, also to think about the utility of what you're actually working with, the safety aspects, the resilience, also the authenticity of what you're working with, whether it's others receiving things from you or you receiving things from others. And again, a key factor that most people tend to forget about is interoperability, and things do not operate in silos. Now, some of this may seem extremely obvious, may seem extremely, well, we know that anyway. But actually, when we're thinking about the digital world or the ecosystem and human factors linking with that world, we don't necessarily always tend to take this into account. And that's why I wanted to really start with tonight to actually think about the ecosystem and the human factors that link with situational awareness and the world we find ourselves in. We all live in very different environments. I happen to currently live in a 16th century thatched cottage. Others might live in a very gadget-driven smart home that was built 12 months ago. Some live in apartments. Everyone has a different environment, but it's still an awareness of that situation. Because when we're thinking about the ways we work, the ways we operate, we may not always be aware of what surrounds us, what might be a threat to us, what could be harmful to us. So this is why looking at the Ennead framework, as I've deemed it, as I said, this is just something that I've pulled together as part of the research I'm doing, thinking with cyber risk, as a set of attributes, which is actually building on what has come from other people's work, which I will go into. So when we think about human factors, when we're looking at that, what we need to think about is the equipment, facilities, the environment, the processes, the management system. And you'll see combinations of these sorts of groupings in many models, many things around. But actually, that's what we're starting to think about when we talk about that. First of all, when looking at the 9 sort of elements, if you're looking at control versus ownership, when I first did information security more years than I care to remember ago, one of the key things I was always told about data is that nobody owned it, according to an agreement known as the Basel II agreement. That actually isn't true today. But what is true and to be aware of is we all work, or some of us work outside, say, the Elsevier environment, is actually who controls it versus who owns it. Control can work at many layers. So when you're thinking from a risk or decision-making point of view, you as the individual do have control over the decisions you make. And also from a cyber risk point of view, this is one of the areas that as humans we tend to be quite poor at, is what sort of decisions we make when we make them. And are we aware of what we need to be thinking about as things that may harm or threaten us? Again, typical risk management. But what we need to be aware of is what you make as decision in a business may not be the same as decisions if you're owning a business. So again, when thinking about awareness and situational awareness and new ways of working, means also potentially when it comes down to where we're situated and located, actually may have a bearing on the way we make decisions. Because one of the things, certainly when I've been in conference calls, especially if I've been with a friend and I can hear an Alexa suddenly go off in the background because a trigger word may have been spoken during the conversation I'm having with that individual, and suddenly the music can suddenly switch on or something like that. But anything like smart sound boxes have been found to be easily vulnerable to hackers for a variety of reasons. So again, it's about control and the ownership and the risk decision making that you need to be aware of when you're doing decisions or even making a group decision about that environment. One of the things we tend to think about, as I said, when we're looking at new ways of working is, again, this one is probably the most familiar along with integrity and availability. These 3 as the security triad have been around since the early 90s. Mostly come from the US government through NIST. But basically, when we're talking about what do we mean by protecting, well, ensuring that we have unauthorized use or unauthorized access to any data, or even to a place where it may be you're working within the office. For some, that might be the case. But the point is, new ways of working means that some of the ways we have to think about protecting our things have had to change. Some of it might be for the better, but not everything may be for the better. If you're in an office, you may be fine from a physical security point of view because you've gone through a barrier, you've got a card that provides you access control into that environment. When you're at home, if you're in your home environment, and again, new way of working, you possibly, or a lot of people on this call, may have been working at home for years, say 1 day a week or every now and again. So you've not perhaps, but the question is, if we're going to be working more days of the week at home or permanently at home, because offices are going to get shut, Does our home insurance cover us for doing that? Does the work insurance and health and safety cover us for that? You know, what do we need to be thinking about when we're protecting ourselves? Are we going to be more, you know, a threat from external people because this is actually a weakness because of where we're working now, rather than having better protection from a physical point of view, sitting in an office? So it's all yeah.
So I'm just going to give you a sort of time thing, because
Fine.
we're about sort of 12 minutes in, and
Yes, all right.
yeah,
I'm only working through these, so
yeah. I'm just saying that's
yeah.
all right, because we need to give everyone a chance. Thank you.
So basically, moving on though, all of what I'm about to say is all integrated anyway. But the thing is, when we're talking about integrity of the data and things like that and the way we work, has to build trust. And trust is a byproduct of integrity on making things work. So again, having this situational awareness linking with these three that have traditionally been together. Yet when we think about availability, we talk about dependability as well as availability. And in a home situation or remote situation, we've also got to think about our infrastructure, which when we're thinking about from a working at home or new ways of working, we now become reliable on our home infrastructure. Is it that reliable? Is it safe? And does it still include the integrity we need if we're actually sharing stuff, and can we easily maintain it? Now, for most, if you have an IT department that can do remote diagnosis and things like that, but what if your internet is flaky? Maintain. So this new way of working and thinking about our situational awareness is really quite key. One of the important things as well is, again, we talked about this at the beginning, if you didn't, is actually the utility of conference calls. Conference calls can actually be a really good way of coming together as a group on a small number or a large number. But what is also important to think about is also this balance thing. The thing about balance is about the intensity, because when you're doing a conference call, I don't know if anybody else has found that, but I find conference calls are quite tiring if you're doing call after call after call after call, and if you don't take a break. So when is the time to do the chill out period? When there is the time to go to the loo or go and make a coffee? The point is, this sort of environment means you're focusing. Also, does it allow for being able to have that chat around the coffee station or the kettle or things like that? So again, is this way of working actually the only way of working, or is there a better way of doing it? And also, does it imply we can trust those at home? There has been several articles during 2020 that say, you know, some employers are looking at, they don't trust people being able to work from home. I have to say, sadly, that this was something I came across early in the year directly, where people weren't trusting people working from home. How do you build that trust up between manager and employee or the team as a whole? These are all issues that you have to think about in the utility way of working. As well as that, it's also working in an environment. If you notice, I've got some blinking lights going on behind my head. The point is, how safe is the environment I'm working in? As I said, if you're in an office, health and safety sort of comes with the environment, but actually with the human factors and this new, how safe is your environment? Probably in where I am now, I happen to rent this. The point is, I have PAT testing, I have my gas boiler tested. But if you own your house, you don't have to do that. It's not mandatory to do that. So having that linking with health and well-being is also back to the, so this is all very sort of integrated. And also, when you're working intensely, a lot of people have found they're working a lot longer and doing things and switching between things, obviously dependent on the role they do. But can you bend or will you break? Is this resilience about the technology alone, or is it about you, the human? How do you able to bounce back? We've heard many stories about the well-being, and especially the mental well-being of people. And this is about this also impacts on decision making and your ability to make decisions as well. And I think all of these factors have to be considered, that this is very much an integrated situation and an integrated. What has totally changed the slide? Because when we think about trust, we trust people. It's endemic within a human relationship. If you want to believe what is going on, that it is not fake news, according to Trump, but it is actually real. It comes from the source you think it comes from, back to our integrity. But it's also potentially the age of authenticity, that we also are going for a much more customized world. So is that also part of the way we're going as well? So authenticity is absolutely fundamental for us to engage in a trustworthy way as well. And ultimately, we are in a world, and the thing is, we're in an interdependent world. And sometimes perhaps if you're only seeing people through a screen and you've got to be aware of your situation, perhaps being sort of removed. And again, child thinking, I'm talking through Zoom or whatever, it's fake. The children aren't real because I can't feel them, I can't see them, I can't touch them. But actually, it's all interoperable. And the hyperconnectivity we have in today's world is another thing that COVID-19 is pushing. And a lot of companies strategically will not reverse what has happened in 2020. This is the year of the change. So ultimately, the ingredients of success for balance and thinking about perhaps the Ennead framework can give you that situational awareness, is linking with the passion, the hard work, but also it allows for innovation, but you must not forget the human factors. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated that, Amanda. It was really insightful. And I'm sorry to have to come in and technically say, I was just trying to.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm glad you did.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions for Amanda, or any thoughts that her talk provoked there? I mean, anything anyone would like to share?
It was excellent. I hadn't thought of it in the same perspective that you had, Amanda. So I'm very glad you were willing to share your thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with your PhD. We want to read it now.
No, that's fine. I just thought it was a different way of looking at the world, to think of it in a more integrated way. I thought my background, it's something we all have to face with what we do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Would you mind just stop sharing a second,
yeah.
Amanda, and then we get all the screens back. That's brilliant. Anyone else got anything that provoked a thought there? Laura's talking.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
Awesome.
Yeah, I said that was really interesting, and thank you so much. And what I was thinking about is, I'm wondering if the HR department of big company like our company as well, are thinking about some of these issues, you know, the security, are we secure working from home? You know, they before it was all about, you know, the ergonomic of your workstation. Now, how do they know about my workstation? You know, of course I did my online course and I know the basics.
Of course.
There are so many questions that we need to answer, and you raise some of them. So I will be curious to know what the HR are thinking about right now. Hopefully they're thinking about some of the issue that you raise.
I hope so. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got.
And if I can add something, oh, sorry, Mike, go on.
Yeah, no, please, you go for it, David.
No, it just made me think of, so before COVID and everything, you can imagine a lot of companies would, if you wanted to work from home, that you would have to fill a form or something and prove that you have the right kind of desk and the right kind of chair. And even take pictures. I know friends of mine that had to do that to prove that they have the right thing. And it felt very, what's the word? Annoying, really. Like, really, do you really not trust me that much that I have to make a picture, right? But then equally now, I found everybody's gone working from home and nobody's asked a thing. It was like, well, you go ahead and work. So it's like this two extreme where, before we didn't trust you, we had to prove, and now like, yeah, whatever, just go and I don't know, this that contrast is striking for me.
I think you and this is what I said, in the rush to do this, there's a lot of things that I would argue that certainly home insurance, as an example, actually says, yes, you can work from home, but not to the degree we're now doing. And it's that balance as well. I think has to be borne in mind. Hence why I said the word balance, because I think that is really key to all of this as well.
Yeah, and the insurance points on that, it reminded me of a friend of mine that works for Barclays, and I remember he said that he couldn't work from home because the insurance didn't allow for him to write actual code while he was working from home.
Yeah.
And I thought that was completely weird, but I'm thinking about what is he gonna do? Can actually code from home now all of a sudden?
There's ways it can be done. There is technologies such as CyberArk which will allow that to happen. But then the problem you then have is if you have a regulatory accreditation of some kind, a lot of these are still based on 1980s thinking, 1990s thinking, and really haven't come into the 21st century at all. It doesn't mean to say the businesses haven't, it just means the regulators haven't. So there's those issues as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So I was going to suggest, if you guys are okay with this, that we move on to Laura's presentation.
Yeah.
You happy with that, everyone? Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Amanda. That was great, and I'm sure if more questions come up from that later on in the session, we can always come back to it. So I'll do the same thing. I'm gonna